Okay, members and officers, it's past 4 o'clock, so we'll start the meeting. I'm Councillor Leo Madden and I chair the Governance Audit and Standards Committee. Some housekeeping, if I may. If the continuous fire alarm sounds, evacuate the room and public gallery by the stairwells. Don't attempt to use the lift. There's a symbol of Queen Victoria's statue outside the civic offices there. In order to comply with the Guildhall Trust Fire Marshal regulations, that's a mouthful, isn't it? If you signed into the Guildhall, which you haven't done, so forget about that. Live streaming. May I draw everyone's attention to the fact that this meeting will be live streamed. Thank you for putting that in brackets, everybody, i.e. filmed. That's my generation. From a camera at a fixed location at the back of the meeting hall, and the recording will be on the Council's website. The camera will mainly capture the backs of anyone making deputations, but there'll be some footage of them as they approach and leave the table where the microphones are located, and of people entering or leaving the room whilst the meeting is in progress. Members of the public are also permitted to record the meeting on the understanding that it either disrupts the meeting or records those stating explicitly that they do not want to be recorded. May I ask everyone to use the microphone provided when they are speaking. So, I'll get the agenda here and start the meeting. So, the first item on the agenda is apologies for absence.
Councillor Young has sent his apologies and he's represented by his Standing Deputy, Councillor Atkins.
Okay, thank you very much. Can I welcome particularly Councillor Judith Smythe to our first meeting of Governance and Gas, it's now called. That's the easiest way to say it, isn't it? And also welcome Matthew to his meeting, as first meeting of this as Standing Deputy as well. Thank you, Chair. And everybody. Shall we go around the table? I think we will. We'll go around the table. As I've said, I'm Leo Madden and I'm the Chair of Governance and Audit.
Good afternoon, Councillor Simon Bosher. I happen to be the Vice Chairman of this particular committee.
Judith Smythe, Councillor for St Jude Ward.
Matt Atkins, Councillor for Cosham Ward, here as a Standing Deputy for Neil Young.
Hugh Mason, Councillor for St Jude Ward.
John Ferret, Councillor in Paulsgrove. Michael Lloyd, Finance Manager for Technical and Financial Planning.
I'm Julian Pike, Deputy Director of Finance.
Kelly Nash from Strategy Unit.
Paul Somerset, Deputy Chief Internal Auditor.
Elizabeth Goodwin, Chief Internal Auditor.
David White, External Audit Manager from Ernst & Young.
Helen Thompson, Associate Partner from Ernst & Young.
Stuart Ackland, Democratic Services.
Peter Bell, City Solicitor.
Joe Miles Smith, Democratic Services.
And I'd like the members of the public to note that officers do work on Friday afternoons, in case there's any misconception that they don't. Can I then turn to the minutes of the meeting of the item 3, the minutes of the meeting of the 8th of... Oh, sorry, declaration of interest. I meant to do. Sorry, declaration of interest. Anybody?
Do I have to declare an interest that I brought an item to the agenda?
Oh,
no, I don't think so.
It's going to be one of those afternoons, isn't it?
It is.
So no declarations of interest. Can we move to the minutes of the meeting of the 8th of March 2019? I shall take these for accuracy in matters arising at the same time, if that's all right with people. And I shall use the big page number rather than the small page number. Okay. So item page 7. Page 8. Page 8, you'll see under item 18, matters arising from the minutes, and this £30,000 limit or hadn't been revisited and something was supposed to be done about it. I have an answer, I believe, and I'd like to pass it on. This refers, probably people who've been on as long as I have will remember that this is to do with MMD. Could I pass those lines? Yeah. Please, Simon, that's okay. So really we're talking about MMD in this, not a general across the City Council, okay? And there's when you get this bit of paper, it's the bit about follow-up. And if I give members a chance to read that, and then if there's any question, maybe I should read it out. Follow-up test, so this is MMD, or Portico as it now is that right? Follow-up inquiries revealed that a procurement policy had been formulated, including information about the purchasing authority thresholds and requirement to seek comparative quotes for procurements over £30,000. There is reference to the requirement to keep all documentation involved in the tender exercise, but no details regarding in what circumstances one should be undertaken. The policy is specific that all information relevant to suppliers and procurements should be stored within the new database called My Compliance. The policy is not explicit as to how suppliers should be sourced or how contracts should be monitored. However, there is a requirement that records and data systems are maintained in such a way as to provide an appropriate, auditable trail of each purchasing activity, including the ability to monitor supplier performance. Are members happy with that then? Yeah. I think it was a previous member of the committee who had raised it in the past.
Just on that one, the last paragraph or the last line sort of bothers me a touch. There is a requirement that records and data are maintained in such a way as to provide an appropriate auditable trail of each purchasing activity, including the ability to monitor supplier performance. I'm sort of looking at Lizzie here. Do we get involved in this sort of aspect as PCC when it comes to MMD or Portico as they are now?
Apologies. We do get involved from an audit perspective, and this is an area that we had undertaken an audit on, which I think is probably where it's generated the query. I think we'll double check as to whether we have got any further work. So we can audit. Beyond that, we can only take things to the relevant board that is in place.
Chairman, if I may. Because at the top of this, and I don't know whether the officers have seen this, previous compliance with policies, laws, regulations, assurance level, no assurance, and current compliance with policies, laws, regulations, assurance level, limited assurance. That doesn't read very well to me.
No, it doesn't. So our remit, it's not a statutory requirement for Portico to have an internal audit function. The reason it does have an internal audit function is because obviously it is owned by the council. So there is a limit, and we can only really progress and raise things with the board. Yep.
So I can talk through why it went from no assurance to limited assurance, if that would help. Okay. So previously there was 2 high-risk exceptions in the original audit. The reason we came to limited was although they have put a policy in place relating to procurement, because of that £30,000 threshold, a lot of the contracts were coming in underneath that, so they weren't necessarily hitting that level of then scrutiny that you'd get from anything over £30,000, which is why we kept it limited.
Is that £30,000 set by MMD or by us?
MMD.
Sounds like there's a case for making it half that, to be quite honest. But no, I just think that perhaps we should be looking a little bit, considering the fact that the City Council forever seems to be signing off more money going into MMD and has done over the past 12 years, 14 years, something like that. I think we need to be a little bit more involved in the auditing of what actually goes on there.
I think it is a matter, though, for this committee to raise directly with the board.
I think you're right. I mean, it's been trundling on for some time, this 30,000 anyway, so perhaps we could ask someone from Portico to come to our next meeting and go through the 30,000 limit with us. Is that okay, Simon? Good explanation, but I think I'd like to put this one to bed if I can at some stage. So can we invite them to the next meeting? Okay, thank you. Please.
Just briefly, I'm interested to see that one of the concerns here is the management and ongoing monitoring day-to-day of external contracts, and that's something that I'm quite interested in seeing that we do better across the piece, because like most authorities, I suspect that's an area that needs to be looked at, just to give you some advance notice.
Okay, members, thank you. So that's page 8. Page 9. Page 10. Page 10, again, if you look at just during discussions, 2 paragraphs above that, a discussion has not yet taken place with the Director of MMD as to what will be within the scope of the audit. I don't know if there's any update on that, Lee.
Unfortunately, the board has had several cancellations of its meeting, and the latest meeting, because there is so many items that are on the agenda, we've been taken off the agenda, but we're going to tackle it via a different stance. So the audit plan in relation to 1920 has not been set in relation to Portico, but to avoid any more delays from any board meetings, what I think we've probably already done is emailed all relevant parties to say these are the areas that we consider need to be audited. Can you agree or not? Because it is a separate company, the audit plan when it comes to the local authority is determined by myself in consultation and discussion, but ultimately I have the final decision. Because Portico is a company, they actually get to set what they would like audited, although we will attempt to influence and obviously come up with the plan as to what we think should be audited, but ultimately it is a board decision. So they could decide to take something off the plan or put something in.
There's an element of deja vu in my next statement. So this is a company the City Council pours money into, that their Board of Directors has decided that we are as inconsequential as to take our audit off their board minutes. Is that what we're talking about here off their agenda?
No, we're talking about the pyramids or Portico, on page 10.
We're talking about Portico with all due respect though, Councillor Bosher, I can't comment on what else was on their agenda. They may well have a long list of things that they actually need to tackle with, so I can't really comment on, but we're going to tackle it via an alternative route.
Would that be resolved by the next meeting, those 2 things? Okay, well, we'll have these in matter arising for the next meeting again. Okay, thank you.
Chairman, if I could perhaps just ask, there's 3 or 4 things that have come out with regards to MMD in the last conversation, and we haven't even got halfway through the minutes of the last meeting yet. Perhaps we could have an item agenda called MMD or whatever they are at the next governance and audit meeting, so we can address the £30,000 and any audit plans that they've actually got, because I come back to what I've said. The City Council pours money into this business. I think we ought to have an understanding of what's actually going on there.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. So whoever comes will have a barrage of questions perhaps with anyway, including the what's to be audited. Okay, but we'll arrange. Well, if you have any information in the meantime then, if you just email members of the panel, of the committee, is that okay? Thank you. Page, anyone on 10? 11? Page 12? Page 13? Page 14? We have, again, if you look under councillor training and development, and the second bullet point, the city solicitor said he would look into whether it would be possible for members to have a formal record of their training so they could use it on future CVs. That's the previous city solicitor. I'm not blaming. I'm not saying anything. I'm not saying anything about you. When there's mention of the city solicitor, it doesn't mean Peter. It means somebody else who did. But for the next meeting, it'll mean Peter, right? This is something that we did discuss in detail, and I think the general consensus was that if there's some training, and I presume it's only city council training, because there's other external training we could do, people would like a record kept of it. I could go back 25 years when we did it. We had a little package of training that we did, and people got little certificates for it, and then you could put it into this, and I think that's something I think that we'll be doing. But we haven't got anybody from training here, have we? No. We've got yeah, sorry, too. Yeah, but there's nobody from training here, is there? We could do that. Okay.
Chair, I think that us having a little dossier of training is the least important thing here. There are various external inspectorates, and for example, our insurance company overall, who would want to see that we were competent to do the job in the event of, unlikely event of claims being made against us and so forth. So I think it's of more importance than our personal satisfaction. We do have to be reasonably competent in order to avoid not being insured, for example.
Yeah, okay, Peter.
I think as a matter of sort of personal probity, it would be appropriate for members to have training and to record it, not least for insurance reasons, but also it affords the authority some statutory defences in respect of certain applications to court, in respect of, for example, equality comes to mind. So it's probably appropriate from a self-protection and a corporate protection point of view as well. So I'm perfectly happy that that's recorded. Yeah.
Anything else on page 14? Page 15? Page 16? Page 17. Can we agree those as a true record? Is that okay? Thank you very much, members. Thank you. I'll sign a copy of that. We have a deputation from Mr. Jerry Bryan. Jerry, you want a deputation on, I think, item 6, the annual government statement. Do you want to do that now, Jared, or wait? Yeah. Okay, fine. Thank you. You circulated your bit of paper, Gerald, Jerry, haven't you?
To members, yes.
Thank you.
Right, so it's Friday, it's 4 o'clock. It must be crackerjack, maybe not. So this must be gas. Thank you for listening to me today. My deputation will be short. It's on agenda item 6, which is the annual governance statement. Just a couple of things, really. The annual government statement, in there we've got item G, which is implementing good practices in transparency, reporting and audit to deliver effective accountability. This is going to sound like a stuck record, sorry about that. If we turn to page 10, we have 2 statements in this report, one about transparency and one about scrutiny. I'd like us to consider both. What is transparency? For me, I think it means that it's to make it easy for others to see what's being done. In our case, I think this applies mostly to decision-making and spending. In the LGA guidance for transparency reporting, a guide that I'm absolutely sure we all keep beside the bed and that we're all completely au fait with, we have some things that PCC are obliged to publish. The first is in my chart anyway, organisation and salaries. So an organisational chart covering the top 3 management tiers of the organisation and showing the following items of information for each member of staff: grade, job title, department and team, permanent or temporary, work contract details, salary in £5,000 brackets, and maximum salary for the grade. According to Google, and I did a very thorough search, our latest chart was published in March 2018. I've asked David Williams about this more than once, and he said that he is waiting for the new directors to be appointed before it gets updated. I say we should keep it up to date. It's frankly unacceptable that we do not provide the mandatory reporting required of us. Number 2, the code mandates that PCC publish the senior salaries, officers salaried over $50,000 a year. In our report from January 2019, we do not report, I say we do not report, adequately, a list of responsibilities of all senior employees whose annual salary was at least $50,000. Nor do we publish, I say, details of bonuses and benefits in kind of all senior employees whose annual salary was at least £50,000. They are both mandatory items for reporting. They are not reported. We should also publish information about the levels of responsibility and accountability of the employees, both in terms of the scale of the organisation and the specific accountabilities of individual roles. My next point, point 3, as Bob would say, the times they are a-changing. We have 3 senior officers, at least to my certain knowledge, who perform roles outside of PCC for which PCC is recompensed. We do not, however, have an aggregated pay report for these 3 roles, which I believe are Chief Executive Monitoring Officer and S151 Officer. We do know, however, that PCC receives £56,000 a year from the Isle of Wight for 0.4, in other words 40% of our S151. But our transparency reporting doesn't make it clear if that is paid to the employee or if it goes into the general coffers or what actually happens to that £56,000. We don't know what Gosport Borough Council gives to Portsmouth City Council for the services of our senior officers, because their reporting dates back to 2014. That is their most current reporting. Nor do we report what benefit our senior officers receive as a result of their serving other authorities. Even if it's nothing, we should say so. We should say it's nothing and report the full benefits of the employees as required by the mandate. There is little, if any, discussion anywhere of the impact on PCC of having huge swathes of our topmost officers' time spent helping other authorities. I know from my own sad experience in business that it is the thinking and reflection time that gets cut first, and they will have those disappearing at a rate of knots. We risk this happening at our peril. My last subject, spending and procurement. You've heard this before. PCC provides details of its spend over £500 each month in a file, and the LGA guidance requires the name of the supplier to be published but not their address. Are you with me so far? Yes, we are. Right, good. So addresses. So because of problems in the past where for some reason we've employed people who've actually paid the wrong supplier more than once, PCC now manually adds the supplier address into the name field for small suppliers. But the LGA says that the ICO recommends not publishing the address. So because PCC has added the address field to the name field, and LGA guidance says if you publish a field you have to publish the whole field and you can't edit it, we now have vendor records that are kept secret because PCC has made it so. Worse still, of course, is the breach of GDPR guidelines by duplicating data in a record and not tracking which of the two elements of that record is the right one. So we could end up sending the check to the wrong supplier after all because PCC hasn't managed to maintain the address records. You just couldn't make this stuff up, and this is not the first or second time that I've raised this. Purpose of spend, this is my last point. The code makes it a legal requirement, and I realise we've only got 40 seconds left, makes it a legal requirement to publish information that makes it easy for local people to understand what good or service was purchased. PCC's records that are published every month, they include 5 different types of other. They include miscellaneous, a line item that is coded as costs below net cost of services. We even have a directorate called other. This makes it really difficult. It's really difficult to know what our money is being spent on, and everybody seems to just laugh it off and think it's okay. As a member of the public, frankly, it's not okay, and this is the 4th time I've raised this. I'm getting very annoyed about the fact that we haven't fixed it. If we, the public, can't understand what goods or services have been bought, it fails the mandatory requirement, and you're lacking. I say this every year, and the birthday cake candles have got smaller and smaller. Very, very last point, sole traders' names hidden. The LGA guidance is clear. Where the supplier is a sole trader, their name must be provided. That's what the guidance says. But for many sole traders, their name is deliberately withheld. The exception, I agree, is where through that name it would be possible to potentially create harm towards a vulnerable person. So people in care, children, vulnerable adults. But really, I don't think that's going to happen to suppliers who supply parking services, nor do I think it's going to happen to suppliers who supply our culture and city development, and nor do I think that's going to be true for suppliers who supply the regeneration part of the council. Why are we doing this? Why haven't we got a handle on this? Who's supposed to be in charge of this? We should be leading the way where others want to follow, and in some ways we really, really are as a council. We really are. But in transparency, we're standing at the back. That's it. Just please get it sorted out.
Thank you. Thank you, Jerry. Could I just answer a couple of the points that you made? I must ask you a question, Jerry. Could you come up in the minutes of the last meeting? Yes. When we were talking about the £30,000 limit, it says the city solicitor said he would provide Mr. Brown with the anonymised schedule of claims he referred to, which had been circulated to the committee. Did you get? Oh, there you are. It works. Could I just say in relation, the salaries of senior officers are in fact in the statement of accounts. So they're in there, right? Some of them show what parts it would come from, but some don't, and that's something that I've talked about with Julian anyway. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. There's an overall salary or package that they've got, and people percentage comes from the other authorities involved. Is that correct, Julian?
Yes, I can confirm that there is a salary package paid to these three officers, and then the charge that's made to the various authorities is accounted for by the City Council, so it comes as income to the City Council.
It would also be true to say that there is an up. Well, if there is, it's not in this report.
I agree.
Okay. Can I also say in relation to what the senior officers do? My recollection is that all that's contained in the Constitution, which has been rewritten at the minute because there have been changes, particularly with strategic directors disappearing, and that will show actually the roles of all the senior officers when we finish it. Is that correct, Peter? Okay, Jerry. That's just to go along. So that was item 7, I think, Jerry, was it? An update anyway on various bits in this. Anyway, so do you, oh, David, sorry. Oh, go. I'm only going to say it's Friday afternoon. Yeah. So item 4, please.
Are you happy?
Please.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So David and I will do a bit of a double-hander on this report. And as a reminder for members who've been on this committee for a while, and as a brief introduction for those who are not, the purpose of this report is to summarise the work that we have been completing and are still in the process of completing to be able to issue an opinion on the financial statements by the 31st of July. I think it would be fair to say that this year has been challenging, not as challenging as it was a couple of years ago, in terms of, for a number of reasons, including sort of late changes arising from a legal challenge on a particular issue in relation to the accounts. And in terms of the timing, at the request of officers, we pushed the start of the audit back, so it started towards the back end of June, which is similar to last year. And so this report has been drafted while the work was still ongoing. It has obviously moved on, and a lot of work has been completed in the last week. I think the position I would say at the moment is that it is very tight, but we have every intention of trying to get the work completed so that we can issue our audit opinion on the financial statements by the 31st of July. In that regard, I would like to say thank you to the finance team in particular, but actually it's more broadly than just the finance team. There are a number of officers in the council who help us in terms of getting this audit work completed. So up front, I would like to say thank you and record that. I'm assuming that everybody will have read the report, so our proposal is that I will take you through the executive summary and then David will talk you through the key areas of audit focus.
Is it okay if we ask questions as you go along the different items?
Yes, that'll be fine. And then we'll pause and regroup, and then if there's questions on anything we haven't covered, then if that's okay, Chair. The overall position is that based on the work that we have completed to date and subject to the satisfactory completion of the outstanding matters, we intend issuing an unqualified opinion on the financial statements and an unqualified value for money conclusion. So kind of that's the top level message, and that's the good news. We have also focused our audit work in doing the areas of highest risk first. So we're reasonably confident that the areas that are most likely to identify adjustments or errors have already been completed or are significantly through the work. So if I can take you to page 23 of the agenda pack, and starting with the executive summary, the first thing we talk about is, has there been a change in our audit scope? And the thing that we bring to your attention here is the thing that we would always update, which is our planning materiality. So when we presented our audit plan to this committee, we would have done so using last year's audited financial statements as the basis for our planning materiality. We update that based on the final statements, and as you can see, there's been a slight increase, but nothing of significance. Those numbers are important because they are the numbers that drive how we report to you, so which errors come through into this report. In terms of the status of the audit, I was proposing to ask David just to take you through each of those to give you an update, as I appreciate that that long list can be quite alarming.
Thank you. So taking those bullet points one by one, the first one, the work on PPE or property, plant and equipment additions and heritage assets is now complete. Our remaining work on the rest of property, plant and equipment and investment property is ongoing, and I'll speak about that, or the key aspect of that, a bit more when we get into section 2. The work on short-term debtors is now complete. Work on creditors remains ongoing, but is well progressed. Our work on cash is substantially complete, as is the work on short and long-term borrowings and investments. I think we are now down to one item each on those still to be tested. The work on provisions, and in particular the business rates appeals provision, is now completed. The work on PFI and private finance initiatives is also substantially complete, and again we'll touch on that again in section 2. Same applies for the pension liability. The work there is now largely completed, and again that is one of the areas of focus that we'll speak about more in a moment. Our work on reserves and MRP, or the minimum revenue provision. So the work on minimum revenue provision is now completed, that with no issues arising for the 18-19 accounts. Again, that is in section 2. The work on reserves remains in progress. For income and expenditure, the evidence has now been received and is being worked through. Disclosures and annual governance statement. Work on annual governance statements now completed or substantially completed. Our work on disclosures has progressed. There are a few remaining to be looked at. The housing revenue account work is now complete. Our work on journal entry testing is progressing. We've got the sample and that's now being worked through. And our general audit procedures has progressed. Some aspects of that remain ongoing. The status of the audit section does then continue on to page 24. The 5 bullet points shown there are the things which we would always do at the very concluding stage of the audit. So those are sort of prepared as far as they can be, but remain to be undertaken at the beginning of next week. And the point there around the national issue arising around pensions is the legal challenge which Helen touched on briefly before. That has now been worked through, and the Council has got back the updated report that it needs from the actuary of Hampshire Pension Fund and has worked through the adjustments to its accounts, and we are largely there in our review of those adjustments. The last point then is around the whole of government accounts submission, which we've shorthanded there to WGA. That is subject to a separate deadline. That does not have to be completed by the 31st of July. The deadline for that is the 13th of September. And so that is what we'll be working to for the whole of government accounts submission. That means that the audit certificate, which is the formal notification that the audit is closed, will not be issued at the same time as the audit opinion, because that is dependent on the completion of the whole of government accounts work. But that is not an issue for concern. That is standard practice where the council is subject to full WGA procedures and they are not completed by the same date as the main audit. Sorry, so...
Sorry, just one of those. I'm the one that's going to interfere, sorry about that. But just the McLeod judgment, and it's covered in one of the reports, I think, from yourselves as well. There is a substantial amount of money involved there. And I presume we've got this actuarial or whatever it is from Hampshire County Council pension scheme. Are we happy with it? And are you happy with it? Or do you just have to note that there is money there, and you finish your bit of business? But Julian, I can't remember, it was several million if I remember from the report, but I haven't marked it up. Is that correct?
It was just under 13 million at 12.6 million was the adjustment we've made in the accounts.
And that's a cost to us?
Well, it shows it reduces the surplus that we've made on the comprehensive income and expenditure account, but it then does get reversed out later on in the account, so there is no impact on the council taxpayer.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
No, sorry, Chair. The last box then on page 24 talks about audit differences, and that was the status in terms of audit differences identified when the draft report or the report was drafted. We have now identified one audit difference which is above our reporting threshold, which is not going to be adjusted in the final version of the accounts. That arises in respect of the pension liability, but is a separate point to do with guaranteed minimum pensions, which the actuary did not fully allow for in the assumptions that they applied in drafting their IAS 19 report, on the basis that they did not view it as material. The calculation we have done substantiates that it's not material, but by virtue of being above our reporting threshold, we're required to report that as a difference. I think it's probably fair to say we wouldn't necessarily expect the accounts to be adjusted for that, because it is judgmental in nature. We had identified one disclosure issue which was above our reporting threshold, which there is further detail on in section 4. And since the report was submitted, we identified one further adjustment in respect of property, plant and equipment of a value of about £6.5 million arising from the work we've done on valuations. That one is being amended in the final version of the accounts as well. It impacts various statements and notes, but it doesn't change the bottom line in the same way, because the entries or any entries are reversed out.
Thank you, David. Taking you through the remainder of the executive summary, in terms of the areas of audit focus, I'm going to ask David to take us through each of those in a moment, but I'll just finish off this section and then go into where the meat of the audit is. In terms of control observations, we carry out a fully substantive audit, so that means we test detailed transactions at the end of the year rather than looking at controls. So if we identify a weakness in controls from our work, we would report it to you, but we haven't done a controls-based audit, is effectively what that is saying. In terms of value for money...
sorry,
Sorry?
I don't think... I just want to know what's added to the report. You've already said it in the report that's on to our... Could we just... we're here all day, sorry, if there's anything additional to report, and I say that to other people who are doing it later on, could we just have that rather than... if there's nothing there, this tells us that there's no matters to report, so I don't think they need to be repeated. Okay, thank you.
We'll just update that. So just turning the page, so value for money I think is important because it is one of the conclusions. It's a separate conclusion within the audit report. So really for new members of the committee, it's just to note that we hadn't identified a significant risk. We've updated our planning assessment. In other audits, we will identify risk and then report. In terms of the final section on this, in terms of other reporting issues, David's already mentioned the annual governance statement, but really just to say that that top sentence is that work is now completed. I'll ask David then to update you on each of the areas from page 28 onwards, but again, taking into account the Chair's comment just then, we will focus on just the things that have changed.
Okay. So the first risk on page 28, the risk of fraud in revenue and expenditure recognition, just in terms of what will have moved on since this report was submitted. As previously touched on, the key area of testing here is around additions to property, plant and equipment and investment property. That work is completed with no issues arising, and the work on journals, which is the other linked piece of work here, is ongoing as previously described, but no issues identified to date. The second risk is on page 29, the risk of misstatement due to fraud or error, which we're required to identify on all audits. And our work here is also ongoing, but substantially complete in some respects. So journals, again, links here, same as before. Estimates, we have looked at the estimates which are shown in the top left box there with no issues arising to date, and we have not identified any significant unusual transactions through the work that we have performed across the audit. And then we move into what we describe as areas of audit focus, so not significant risks, but area of higher assessed inherent risk. The first of these is the valuation of land and buildings and investment property. Our work on land and buildings within the housing revenue account is completed with no issues identified. the work on the valuation of the remainder of property, plant and equipment and investment property. We have received back the evidence for our sample, worked that through, raised some further queries with the valuers. We've had responses back to some of those, which we're now working through. We're just waiting for a small residual number of responses back. As I say, that work has given rise to a difference which arose because of the updates made to the fixed asset register and how those are reflected in the accounts of about 6.5 million, which will be corrected in the final version of the statements. The next area of focus is PFI accounting. So as I'd mentioned before, this is now substantially complete with no issues arising.
Chairman, before we go there, what did you do? You reviewed assurances regarding the appropriateness of the PFI financial models. Did you find them to be appropriate? And you also stated you'll provide a further update of the meeting of Governance and Audit today on your conclusions on PFI.
So yes, excuse me. So in 2016-17, we used an internal specialist on PFI to review the accounting models for the 2 PFI schemes which are material to our audit. That gave us assurance over the models as they were at that point in time. So what we have done then subsequent to that is to check that there have not been any significant changes to the accounting models for those PFI schemes, and that enables us to bring forward the assurance that we gained from that specialist review. So so there are no issues to report to you in terms of the suitability of the accounting models, which are then generating the entries in the accounts for those schemes. And in terms of a general update, at the point in time when this was submitted, we still had one of the schemes to agree through back to the model. That's now been done. And our work on PPE additions has covered off the point there about additions to the PFI assets. And so that is kind of where we are now in terms of that work. There are no findings arising from our work on PFI to report to you.
You are content?
We are content. As I say, we do have specialists who are trained in review of these things, which the audit team doesn't have that degree of specialism, so we rely on the work that they undertake to give us those assurances.
But just for new members, can you confirm that we have 4 PFI projects, but the 2 we're talking about are highways and Milton Cross, is that correct?
Highways and waste.
Highways and waste.
The next area of focus on page 32 is the pension liability valuation. As discussed, updates have been made to the final version of the accounts now in respect of McLeod because of changes to the assumptions that feeds through into the actuarial report. And then in looking at the potential impact of the guaranteed minimum pension, that also gives rise to a small difference, which is then an unadjusted difference in the accounts, which will come through when we talk about the letter of representation. So our work on pension liability is now substantially complete. And then minimum revenue provision. Again, this is another area where we use an internal specialist to review the calculations of the council in establishing its minimum revenue provision, and in having changed the way that is calculated, in establishing the historic over provision, which resulted from that change in calculation, which is then being gradually reduced to reduce the in-year charges of MRP over a period of a number of years. That work has just now been concluded. There is no impact on the figures as they are reported in the 18-19 financial statements, and we are satisfied that we now agree the total historic over provision and what remains to be drawn down against that. The last area of focus is on page 34. It relates to new accounting standards. There is really no update to be provided here because this was completed at the timing of the report being submitted. There are no issues in terms of how the council has addressed IFRS 9 financial instruments or 15, which is revenue from contracts with customers.
Chair, the very final point to make, which is in Appendix D on page 66, is the management representation letter, which obviously you will have read. It is important that the committee understands that the content of this letter is what will be signed by Chris Ward as the Director of Finance and the 151 officer. Effectively, what it does, more or less, is say that you have shared all information that you should have shared with us as auditors, and you've not hidden anything away. I would point out that there are no unusual items within this letter of representation, so this is a relatively straightforward one. However, there will be a change to the point 5 under section A, which is on the right-hand side of page 66, which currently says there are no unadjusted audit differences. We will ask management to update that to explain the reasons for not adjusting the difference that we have identified, the judgmental difference that David explained earlier around GMP. And that's the only change to that document. That's all we wanted to do in terms of an update. If there are any other comments or queries on points within the presentation, happy to take them, Chair.
Thank you very much. Open to any members? John?
Yeah, it's really following up from your question earlier, Chair, and that's in terms of the McLeod judgment. Maybe it's a question for Julian. Spoke about the cost, but the cost not being borne by the council taxpayer. So who bears the cost of that increase?
Well, what will happen is that these liabilities will unwind over a very long period of time. The council is making, as all authorities are in Hampshire, are making additional contributions to the pension fund. There are actuarial reviews that take place on a 5-yearly basis, and the contributions will be adjusted such that over the very long life that these liabilities arise over, that they can be met from within the fund.
Yeah, and just from my understanding, and maybe the rest of the committee, in terms of the McLeod judgment, does it mean that that everybody now has the same contribution, or there's the same employer contribution, rather than the... So you had a two-tier, as I understand it, two-tier contribution schedule that came in, so now everyone will have the higher contribution?
I'm not fully au fait with the full workings of how pension will be working going forward, but at the moment pension contributions for both LGPS and teachers are tiered in accordance with the salary earnings of the individual. I have not heard anything that says that those tiered contributions would be changing.
Any other points on item 5? Okay, can we agree the recommendations there on the paper? Members note the audit performance for 18-19 to the 5th of July. Members note the highlighted areas of control weakness from the 18-19 audit plan. Members note the annual audit report and opinion for 18-19. Yep. That agree? Thank you.
Sorry, Chairman, is that the recommendation for our... That's the recommendation for internal audit, is it not? Which is item 5.
Oh, God's sake, right. It's too hot in here. It is. Sorry, and I apologise to people. It's item 4, and there are no recommendations. Right.
It's for the committee to note the status of the audit.
Yeah.
Chairman, I propose that we note...
Did I promote you or demote you to internal audit? I'm not sure.
I merely propose that we note.
Would somebody like to take the chair? Now move to item 5, which is the annual internal audit performance status report for 18-19 audit plan and annual opinion. Please.
Thank you, Chair.
Sorry, you've got a new copy of it with the coloured... Yes, everybody's got that. With coloured bits. Thank you.
So, Chair.
It should have been on the table. That's it. That's it. No? That's it.
Okay. So, Chair, if I may...
Sorry, has everybody got the new? Thank you. Sorry.
No, that's okay. So if I may take you through the various elements. So number one, we needed to conclude the work of 1819. So the report and the coloured version. So on pages 1 to 5, it is giving you an update that we have completed the 1819 plan. We have got 3 areas of no assurance to bring to your attention, which I will come on to. But obviously, because we've come to the end of the year's plan, we also need to make an assessment and give an annual opinion, which is a requirement and forms part of the annual governance statement. So in relation, if I can first take you through, in relation to the areas that we have not previously reported to, they are contained in the summary appendix, which is the table that looks like this one. I'm not going to go through it, but I'm happy to take any comments. So that is the remaining work from 1819. In addition to those, though, you also have an appendix which will contain port CCTV, home to school transport and hire cars, where there are 3 no assurance audits. When we had our briefing, because these have not long concluded, although some of them were concluded back in April, at the briefing we agreed that Audit would attempt to have a position update for you to be able to give you perhaps some assurances how things were moving forward. So I won't take you through the individual areas. However, what I would like to say, unless you have questions that come up, what I would like to say is in relation to, so 2 relate to one directorate, the 3rd relates to the port, so it's Regen or the port. So we've sat down with all relevant parties, so that will be either line management, assistant directors or the directors, to go through what plans of action they will put in place. What I can tell you is in relation to CCTV at the port, they have taken on board obviously all of the areas that were identified. There is an additional sheet, and apologies for perhaps overwhelming the committee with as much information, but there is an additional sheet which was their response. We have been able to verify some progress. It's in its infancy stages, but it is moving definitely in the right direction. In relation to home to school transport and in relation to hire cars, again, both have action plans that have not been submitted to this committee. And over the last couple of weeks, we have verified there has been some movement, but there are a number of areas that are still open and in progress. The home to school transport causes me concern, and what I would like to do, because they are actioning things as we speak, I would like to bring a fuller report back to this committee in September, depending upon the date that is set for September, to give you a fuller position update with have they bridged the gap with the risk exposures. So all 3, there were significant issues. All 3, they have engaged with us. They're at various stages, but specifically in relation to the 2 Regen, the hire car and the home to school transport, will come back to you in September. Do you want me to stop there before I come on to the annual governance and answer any questions that you may have?
Please do. I have one question, then I'll pass over. It's okay. Just on the coloured one that we've got. I'll try and get you the page. It's just something that jumped out at me, Liz, and I thought, I hope this is just a one-off. It's it's page 1 of 3. And it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 down. It's homelessness and temporary accommodation. The issue is raised in relation to the management, control and housekeeping of B&B payments and the assessment of personalised housing plan for eligible homelessness applicants. So I'm hoping it means one applicant, not being completed within a suitable time frame. That was picked up. Is that a problem, or was it just an oversight on somebody's part and we needn't concern ourselves about it? Oh, yeah, that's fine.
I think I found it now. It was one applicant from recollection, and a lot of the arrangements that they have in place are actually pretty robust.
Simon?
First of all, Chair, thank you. I'm pleased that we're going to have another look at the home to school transport. It does seem to me that is potentially a safeguarding risk, and that we need to be very vigilant about it. I just wanted to draw attention also to page 1 of 3 of your now coloured diagram. I had to go back to my old one to see my notes. The item at the top is a tiny amount of money, but I just wanted to draw attention to quite a lot of work that's been done in the NHS, and I was saying earlier I felt right at home with this set of papers, because that's how we used to receive this sort of amount of paper every time on the board of the Health Trust. But at the very top, this is the whole question about, I think this is the question about money being given to vulnerable people, and is it not? Okay. I couldn't write it well. Could you explain what that is all about? And I wanted to, in the course of that, to draw attention to the fact that I wondered if we had actually done audits of the any cash that passes hands between care workers and individuals, because there is really a potential for minor but very serious fraud at that point. So what is this one about, Elizabeth? That would be very helpful. I've obviously got the wrong end of the stick.
No, that's okay. Is it a appointeeship?
No.
Okay. Can you...
Well, what is this one for then, if it's not what I think?
So I apologise. I think maybe giving you coloured copies where we've got multiple numbers and multiple ones, believe it or not, it's probably not helping me find
it's the
which one.
Accounting, yeah, appointeeships, yes it is.
It's appointeeship.
Yes it is, right at the top of the list.
So appointeeship is where the authority actually acts on behalf of a member of the public who does not. So it is their funds that we are managing.
Yes.
It's not funds that we're giving to them, it is their money.
Yes.
So whilst it is a tiny amount, obviously it's their money, it's not our money, which is why we've raised it.
That was the point I was making.
Yes.
Do you think this is is this just a tip of an iceberg, or is this an isolated incident?
When we do our testing, we will take a random sample, and to be honest, whilst we have a look at the end-to-end system, and you can make a judgment as to how robust and effective the system is, and I think appointeeship in actual fact is pretty well maintained, which means we may then have an anomaly, I can't even say it, nope, somebody's going to help me out with the
anomaly.
Thank you very much. In the sample that's been tested. And we've given it a reasonable assurance because the error rating was small. So it's not endemic to there being problems within the system.
Do we audit times when our employees take cash and in order to run errands for, or to do cash, to spend money on behalf of clients?
It won't necessarily come up as a specific audit, but it may come up as themes in some of the other audits. There are a lot of arrangements in place, though, to safeguard our members of staff for any accusations, obviously. So it depends which area it is, because we may have some interaction under the sheltered housing scheme. Specifically in relation to appointeeship, we will do our darndest not to deal in cash anyway, and to actually have a complete trail and make payments that are more efficient, and cash is less efficient for us.
Yes, I was less I mean, now I understand exactly what you mean here. I just hope we are being vigilant about times in when, both to protect our own staff and to protect vulnerable people, we're being vigilant about those somewhat informal processes where financial abuse can occur.
Okay, thank you. I've got Simon Boucher and then Hugh. Okay, Simon, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just coming back to the two high-risk ones, the hire car one that you mentioned, and the Transport to schools, these are on pages... Yeah, they're in the coloured sheets and they're red. They stand out like a sore thumb because it's nice to see there aren't many red ones. You say that you've been putting a plan in place to address the risks that you've identified, and you haven't got any insurance. Now, as I understand the process, you sit down with whoever it is that's in charge of that department and come up with a plan to address those, by which you go back and then see whether they have addressed them. Have you put those plans in place, and are they missing their deadlines there, or are we still ongoing in that process?
At the end of the audit, yes, we'll come up with an agreed schedule of actions and an agreed time frame. The time frame in relation to home to school transport has slipped slightly, in that when they said they thought they would have things in place, they haven't quite got things in place. But it is a work in progress, which is why I don't want to take it off the table, and I want to bring something back to you at a slightly later stage. So the plans are in place. They have triggered all of the actions. The two criticals that you have that are open around the DBS, licensing and the insurance, some of the arrangements have been evidenced as being in place, but not all of them as at today.
So it's slightly slipping in some.
Slightly slipping. They are fully aware and they are working on it.
Right, okay. The reason I'm saying that, Chairman, is, and I'm probably leading Lizzie down a path that we went before when I was chairing the panel, and she's nodding at me, is that I gave, and the reason I asked this question is because sometimes you can put a time frame in place and it would not fit the managers, even though the managers would largely determine that. It sort of got shoved sideways, and internal audit were not getting the support out of those people. Now, I gave Lizzie the instructions that if that was the case, then the appropriate manager could come to this meeting and explain why they hadn't actually met their deadlines that they themselves had agreed. I think we did that once with planning, and it seemed to spread like wildfire and work very well. Could I suggest, Chairman, that we perhaps give Lizzie that option going forward to bring whoever it is to the next committee if they haven't missed their deadline, because you'll certainly know by the briefing whether they have or they haven't. It just focuses a mind.
I'll give Liz any authority she needs for anything.
Yeah, just following that one up. When reading this, I was most alarmed to see that the critical risk exception on Journey to School was raised in 2015 in your audit. You agreed action to be taken place. Something appears to have happened in 2016, and then it's all over and they didn't bother anymore. And I think that we do need to have a report back to us on why there was no action taken in 2017, 2018 or 2019.
I can actually tell you now, they had a change in staff, quite a large change in staff, and for whatever reason, there clearly was no handover.
I think, therefore, this does raise the question of whether the succession planning in that area is being done properly.
I can't comment in relation to that, but going back to Councillor Bosch's concerned, if you have criticals that are still open come the end of August, I think the director will be more than willing to come along. He was actually more than willing to come along today, but we thought it would probably be helpful to give you a position update, and if it's still outstanding, they will have no problems coming along in September.
I think, Chairman, maybe if we're bringing reports back, the next one on these two areas, that perhaps we have the appropriate director responsible here to answer any questions that may arise, rather than Lizzie having to deal with it on their behalf.
Okay. I know that, Matthew.
Just again on the same issue. In terms of what's happening now, I mean, most of the higher risk things that we're seeing in this report are financially related. It strikes me that the DBS issue is potentially even more serious than that in terms of safeguarding. What is in place right now to deal with the fact that there are potentially drivers driving children in the city with no verifiable DBS check or DBS where the council can't verify the DBS check on a driver?
Well, to give you those assurances, the licensing department, if they license any driver, they have to have DBS checks. They have to have all of the relevant insurance. And we've audited that several times. Their processes are very robust, very clear, very transparent. The issue, to be honest, that we have is that we can't assume, because we have a contract in place, that if we have a scheduled list of users and drivers, that those are all within our area, and we know because they pitch up on the licensing register and they would have had all of the checks. So what the organisation should be doing is it should be asking all of the relevant providers for a complete list of who they do use, be it that some are specifically allocated to routes, or they may just have a pool of the drivers, and then we need to check those against our licensing department, and if there is areas where they don't fall within this city, obviously we need to have alternative. So there are very good controls in place. We need to do the logic between the two systems to give us that comfort that those that we are using for our most vulnerable, we've already done the checks on. Does that help at all?
Yeah, I think so. So what you're effectively saying is that we've got reasonable confidence the checks are occurring. It's just a case of having the evidence in place and the systems cross-checking one another to confirm it within our records.
We know drivers that are registered would have had the checks.
Mm-hmm.
And as I said, we've audited licensing many times. We cannot have the same assurance, although the likelihood is they are drivers that are on our register, but we need the list from our providers to be able to do that cross-check.
Okay.
Super, John.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I just wanted to make a point about the CCTV report and also follow up with a question. But clearly, there's a litany of issues in there that have been exposed as Audit have done what they should be doing. And I picked out, well, that's not in this report, I don't think, but I certainly picked out from earlier reading. Not complying with RIPA in terms of covert surveillance and people being aware that covert surveillance could be taking place. There's something in one of the reports about staff not being aware. There's the Principle 11 of the Surveillance Camera Code of Practice, stating about the quality of the images should be used or could be used for evidential purposes, and apparently the facial recognition aspect of CCTV is not up to scratch, and therefore if someone was or something did happen, you wouldn't be able to identify using CCTV, which begs the question, what is the point of it if it can't be used? And there's issues over people accessing the control room who shouldn't be there, and clearly that could allow all sorts of issues in terms of accessing data and doing things that they shouldn't. So I suppose my question is, does that not then necessitate a report to be it the Information Commissioner, or should there be, because for example the Surveillance Camera Code of Practice, is that a statutory code? If you breach that code, what is the penalty for doing that? So really that's my point. What should we be reporting this to external bodies in terms of these numerous breaches that have taken place?
The control arrangements observed out at the port as at the time of the audit were that there was not a robust framework at all. There is no clear indication that they have specifically breached RIPA, but the understanding and the knowledge kind of around it is lacking. The port register themselves individually, separately to Portsmouth City Council. I can't answer why that's the case, because I haven't quite confirmed myself as to why. But they register with the Information Commissioner, so if there is any data breaches, they are duty bound to submit a return themselves. Obviously, so you have key officers out at the port, the same way you have key officers here at corporately, centrally. So if there is anything that they need to report, they need to do that themselves. There were so many gaps as at the initial time of the audit, and unfortunately this is another area where we had performed an audit and there were a number of gaps and things hadn't quite moved on. The code of practice is a mandatory code of practice, which means if there is an issue, they could in theory be inspected. They in theory could have fines. They have done, though, a phenomenal amount in a very short period of time to make certain now that they batten down the hatches. But that is the exposure that they had in place.
Chair, yeah, thanks for that, Lizzie. But it clearly concerning reading all that, particularly given the port's position, it's contiguous with the ferry port, the security concerns that there must be, and I just thought the police, the security services, or whatever, would take a greater interest in what provision was being made there, but clearly not. And this has really exposed, that there's been a very lackadaisical approach to operating a system that is absolutely essential should something happen there in terms of being able to identify what's going on.
The pixel issue, they do actually, there's a particular standard and it does meet the standard, and it's my understanding there is very good liaison with the police, and as and when they have needed and acquired certain imagery, they have been satisfied with that, so I don't think we have those issues. I think they fully recognise the security issues due to the nature of the activities that go on there, which is why they are wanting to get their act in order. And again, they've had some shift or changes with their staffing, so I'm pretty optimistic they do not want a red audit coming out again, and that is why, to be honest, collectively we gave it no assurance, because there were too many gaps.
Anything else, Liz?
So that's in relation to the progress report and everything that came along. The other elements of this report are that I have to give an annual opinion. And I know Mr. Ward usually kind of gets bored with me coming up with the same opinion. And I'd like to say, in actual fact, Portsmouth are very good at getting on with tackling a number of the areas and issues. We've still got an awful number of areas, though, that although they're coming up with their own time frame and their own actions, we're seeing insignificant movements, and we still need to understand why that is the case. The annual opinion for this year is limited, but it appears it is going in a better direction. The reason I'm saying it's going in a better direction is there has been quite a large decrease in the number of limited and no assurance audits, despite the fact I'll just put 3 on the table. The area that causes me concern is this lack of movement in some pockets of implementing what they say they're going to implement, and that is going to be our main focus, I think, moving forward. So the tail end of this is to say annual opinion, limited. I'm optimistic it is moving in the right direction. I'm not generally optimistic about much at all, but I do think it does look like it is progressing. So and that's the final bit. So there's a number of graphs to give you some illustrative information, and I'm happy to take any comments on the second part.
Any members, any questions? No? Okay. Okay. Liz, thank you. Helen and David, you don't have to stay here if you've something better to do. It's been Friday afternoon.
We need to stay here until you've considered the statement of accounts.
Okay, well, we'll do that. Well, yeah, I have to keep you a bit longer then, because I'm going to move the agenda, because Stuart's here. We've got an item which shouldn't take too long. That's item 12. Would you like to introduce? No, I'm calling it. Item 12. Procedure. Simon's put this on the agenda.
13.
Is it 13? Oh, for God's sake, bleeding. 13. You're right.
Yes, Chair. As you can see, Councillor Bosher has asked for the committee.
Sorry, did we move the recommendation in item 5 of the agenda of the internal audit report?
Thank you, Matthew. We did that about 3 hours ago, but you're right. We didn't do it. We did it in the wrong item. Can we agree those recommendations?
Yes.
Thank you, Matthew. You're absolutely.
Fourth one, about bringing back reports on the schools transport and see democratic
On the
services.
CC,
We need to add a fourth recommendation, Chair, to bring a report back.
Is that agreed? Fourth recommendation. Thank you. I'm now calling item 13.
Thank you, Chair. As members can see, Councillor Bosher has asked the committee to review a couple of discrete points in respect of the Council's call-in rules and procedures, and if the committee is so minded to ask for a report, I'm assuming to come to your next meeting. And I think, I know Councillor Bosher's probably got a lot to say. I don't know whether you want me to speak after Councillor Bosher or whether you just want me to make a few points before Councillor. I'll be guided by you, Chair. Obviously, I've got a few views, but I could reserve those to later or to the September meeting, whichever works for the committee.
Okay, thank you. But just to say, you've given an extract from the Constitution to members, haven't you? So hopefully members have accept whatever it is, extract of Part 3 of the Constitution in relation to calling.
I have, and I can circulate. I've got some more for those that haven't got them readily to hand, Chair.
Everybody got that? Extract of Part 3 of the Constitution. No. Finish, I'll pass over to Simon. Go on, Simon.
You wanted to say something, Julie?
Oh, no.
Thank you, Chair. I don't intend to go down the political line, and I think hopefully people will take this in the spirit in which it's intended. But this has come about largely because of two call-ins that we had last year. One was Victory Energy and the other one was a residence parking programme. The Victory Energy one, the Cabinet decision was on the 10th of August. It was called in within 5 days, which is what they have to go through. You have to go through a process where the 2 days, the decision has to be published 2 days after the meeting, and then members can call that decision in within 5 days of that. So effectively 7 days is what they've actually got. So you've got a tight time constraint there to actually call it in, and you effectively have 3 rules that it has to meet one of the 3 effectively to satisfy the call-in procedure. One is incorrect or inadequate information, one is taken without adequate information, and the other one is contrary to the Council's agreed budget and or policy framework. So it's fair to say that most call-ins probably tick the first 2 rather than the third one. So you've got that time constraint. So with Victory Energy, it was called in on the 10th of August. It ticked all the appropriate boxes, and it went to a special meeting of scrutiny management on the 21st of September. So it was a 6-week time window. The other one was the residence parking one, where the decision was on the 31st of July. It was called in within those 7 days, and it was actually considered on the 9th of November. So that was 14 weeks after the Cabinet decision had been taken. Now, If I talk about the residence parking one briefly, because that's where the anomalies all come in, that was based, and I think Councillor Mason was a member of the scrutiny committee that actually heard it. That centred around on MB and MC, where they were going on a consultation area that had subsequently changed, and therefore it was called in on that basis, and it was proven. But we had a situation in that 14-week period where it doesn't stop the decision, so MB and MC just went straight in. Now, this isn't about the parking zone itself, it's more about the point of what was the point in calling it in, waiting 14 weeks to say, yes, it's wrong, when everything had actually gone ahead anyway. It sort of rendered the whole process completely irrelevant in that respect. Now, that's where I have an issue. The second part of it I have as an issue is the fact that when that one was called in, and it's, look at the residence parking one, when it was actually called in and it was proven by vote, it then went back to the cabinet member subsequent to that, because it was referred back, who considered the same report that had been called in, it hadn't changed, and made the decision based on, well, I haven't seen any more evidence to change my decision, which begs two questions, or three questions really. If the same report was called in and it stood the test, and then it was subsequently went back and was put through with no material change, then arguably it could have been called in again and again and again and again, because it still satisfies the reason why. So the first argument is you can't take the same report back for reconsideration that has already been opposed by scrutiny management. And the second thing was perhaps the comment, and it sort of applies to Victory Energy, because with the Victory Energy one, it wasn't actually upheld on the basis that it was actually incorrect. The leader of the City Council actually conceded and said, I'll happily take it back to Cabinet. So he was effectively agreeing with scrutiny in that respect and taking the same report back to be considered again. So my points are effectively, if you're going to have a constrictive test at the start of the process, the 5 days, and meet and satisfy the criteria to take it to scrutiny management, you can't realistically sit for 14 weeks and wait for it to be considered. There needs to be a time limit on the back end as well as the front end of it. And this is where potentially it does become political, because it leaves a political party open to accusations of abuse, because the chair of scrutiny management tends to come from the same political party as the administration. So therefore, is it a case of kicking it into the long grass? My second point, I guess, is the fact that you cannot take the same report back to the cabinet member if it has been proven to be to succeed with the tests. It needs to be a materially changed report to reflect what's gone wrong. Otherwise, it can be called in again. And I think, where was the third point I was talking about? I'm just losing it. Just bear with me a moment. And it shouldn't be down to others to provide that information if the test has already materially happened. And thirdly, and finally, Chairman, it's perhaps specific to MB and MC as the example, in the fact that, is it really appropriate that if something has been shown to have inadequate or incorrect information, that while it's sitting there waiting for it to be seen by scrutiny management, that the actual report is implemented in the first place? So I think we need a back-end time limit, and I'm relaxed about what that time limit should be. I think maybe a month, let's say, that when the report goes back beyond scrutiny management, if it is upheld, it should be a different report, not the same report, and that whatever the decision is attached to that particular report that's called in shouldn't be implemented before security management have actually had a chance to actually rule on it. So those are three changes I'm looking for. I'm open to what time limit is. I feel perhaps a month would be a reasonable time limit, because you've got to produce and publish reports, get the committee together. And perhaps the last thing is, I think we should always look to do them, as we tend to do, as special meetings rather than to tack them onto scrutiny management standard meetings, because they can make for awfully long meetings if we're not careful. But I'm open to suggestions from other members of the panel.
Thank you. Not a minute, no. Judith?
Thank you for that. I'd just like to add to that I think we need some sort of clause that allows for something that's an urgent decision that's made by Cabinet, that whereby the scrutiny committee can't kick it into the long grass either, so that it would use its best endeavours, if there are genuine commercial reasons for going ahead with something, to meet as soon as possible, so that the scrutiny committee can't ever be accused of holding something up that might be of commercial or policy importance. And I think that can be done.
The time limit after the event is trying to address as much of that as possible.
Yes, no, I understand that, but I think there could be something where there's a real urgency to make a decision, but where we wouldn't want scrutiny not to be able to get involved, and therefore it would use its very best endeavours to expedite the matter or something like that. Stuart, would be helpful, I think, to present the scrutiny process genuinely holding up something that might be might need a brisk series of actions.
Okay, well, I've spoken to Simon about this recently, and I'm totally in favour of anything that brings things forward and it doesn't have them hanging in the air. I've got no problems with that. And I think some of them, I only did one, I'm on the scrutiny management panel, but I only did one last year because of that. And I think you're absolutely right about not waiting for the next meeting, particularly if they're not scheduled, which they're not scheduled at the minute. What we're looking for is to consider the request from Councillor Boucher, and I would add to that what I'm suggesting is that we have a report to our next meeting. That in fact we endorse the need to do something. We're called in and we have a report to our next meeting, which is sometime September, I think. I can't remember. It's in the papers. Is that time enough, Stuart? It'll be a draft, and I think it's on the council thereafter, whatever we agree here.
Yeah, I mean, I brought it here because obviously it's a constitutional issue, but I fully understand that it impacts on scrutiny management. It has to go through this committee and then it has to be endorsed by full council after that because it forms part of the constitution. I mean, personally, I'd like to think it would speak. I mean, I would turn around and say, I'm not planning any call-ins anytime soon, to be quite honest, before anybody gets carried away. It was just that these two highlighted the extremes of a system that didn't really have checks and balances after the process had actually been satisfied. And I understand from the city solicitor that it is unusual in the fact that in most legal fields, so to speak, there is always a time limit placed on applications to actually sort things out.
The thing which I think is most important here is your second point, which is that whilst it obviously is up to the cabinet member to make the decision, and the decision rests with that cabinet member even after it has gone to scrutiny, I think we must have something in there that the cabinet member must take cognizance of the scrutiny. However, it may be one side or the other, but you can't just go back to the original and say, I don't see anything's changed.
Well, that was entirely one of my points that actually came out of it, Hugh, in so much that, I'm not going to name the person, we all know exactly who it is, made that comment at the end of it. Now, I didn't think about it after the event until the meeting had actually closed, but actually the onus is not on scrutiny management to change the report. The onus is actually on the cabinet member to make sure the report takes that into reflection. And it's not down to scrutiny management to say there is, here's the extra evidence to build your case, Mr. or Mrs. Cabinet Member. So those are the issues that came out, because arguably, as I said, if scrutiny management uphold the fact that it has failed one of the tests and send it back, and it's the same report, I could have called it in the following day all over again. Now, I would argue that is a complete waste of council's time to highlight a problem, and you could do that time and time and time again. Now, I didn't think of that at the time, it's come out since, but I think we need to actually get this sorted out.
I think so.
Is that okay? If you actually look at the procedures that Stuart has given out, the very last bullet point on the second page tells you what happens. And the panel will either resolve to take no action, or refer back to Cabinet, or refer back to whoever, could be a planning, I don't know, right, yeah, setting out the nature of concern. So it is up to the Scrutiny Management Panel, having listened to the evidence, to say, well, we're referring this back for these reasons. So it's written in there. Judith, I don't want to go on with this one, if that's okay. We're going to get a proper report in September, but quick, quick.
Eliminate that step by making sure that the Cabinet has to take into account and answer in a public way the scrutiny report, and then there doesn't have to be that coming back and back.
That's right, and I think something then, when it's referred back to whoever it is, then tells the Scrutiny Management Panel what they've done and why they've done it, whether they've accepted no conditions or they're not changing their mind or whatever. Yeah, so I think it needs beefed up a bit. Are you happy with that, Simon, for a draft report?
I am. The point you're actually making on that one, setting out the nature of its concerns. Well, if scrutiny management uphold it, and it stands the test of inaccurate information and whatever, that's been put forward by the lead member as to why it's actually failed that. It's been agreed by scrutiny management, therefore scrutiny management by de facto has actually set out the nature of its concerns by agreeing with the call-in.
Right, so here's me belabouring this. If I remember the vessel one, it was it was called in because people believed that the financial implications particularly hadn't been taken into consideration. So that's an easy one, if you like, to say that you need to look at that. So there were reasons given for it. It was referred back to Cabinet, and I think what happened was that I can't remember what happened, but it never came back to call in. And I think you're right, Simon. We don't want to keep getting the same thing back in. So there's got to be reasons for it to be referred back, and then just for scrutiny panel at some stage in the future to learn that whether it's Cabinet or whatever has taken the decision, and this is the decision, and that would just go on the minutes of some meeting. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Now I may be depending what Stuart comes back on, I might have a special meeting on the draft on this because I think it might take some time depending what we come back on. But Leslie, you and I will make a decision on that as Chair and Vice Chair. Is that okay? Okay. Thank you. So we've considered what Councillor Boucher said, and we agree a draft report for the September meeting.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you. What was the statement? Where is it? 6. Have we got that one right for a change? Yes. Wow. So we're back, Kelly, please.
Thank you, Chair. So veterans of the committee will know that every year I come with this report, which is the annual governance statement, a requirement which sets out our framework as an organisation for making sure that the systems and processes are in place to ensure that we're conducting our business lawfully and in accordance with proper standards. There are 2 appendices to the report. So one is the statement itself, which includes Lizzie's annual opinion, and also the local code of governance, which sets out in some detail how each of the principles of governance are upheld through our systems and processes. In the statement, we summarise those systems and processes, and we also set out the kind of key risks and exposures for governance in the authority, and you'll notice that they're kind of 2 natures of those. One are the very operational things, and they quite often follow some of the risks that we pick up within our audit programme, and others are more strategic risks, and they kind of reflect the changing nature of the authority and our operating context. So some of those issues around more complex partnerships with other organisations, officer capacity in a changing environment, and also the changes in that environment itself, so the change to the legislative context in which we're working. What we'll do over the course of the year is focus our work on governance on those areas, and where necessary and relevant, you'll receive reports back from those, and of course it also links to the quarterly reporting that you receive from myself on performance and from other colleagues on other areas of the business. The recommendations are to approve the statement and the associated local code. I'm happy to take any questions on that.
Thank you, Kelly. For a lot of us it is, as you said, déjà vu. Now, however, you've got to put it to this committee every year. Are there any points or questions from them? Could I ask you one thing? Do we have a Deputy Chief Executive? And is that Deputy Chief Executive in this room? Because I've only heard of a city solicitor. Do we have a, because it mentions Deputy Chief Executive. Is there one?
My understanding is that we're reverting to the previous process where the Chief Executive will nominate his deputy on a rolling basis.
I didn't even know about that process. There you are. Can we do it? Oh, it's got to be an officer.
I think you need to speak to him about that.
Any points, members, on this one? Is that okay then? Can we agree the recommendations then that agree the annual governance statement and approve the refreshed local code of governance? Kelly, thank you. Thank you, member. Statement of accounts, Julie. Please. Okay. No, go forward to your feet.
The statement of accounts are brought to the committee for you to approve. You approving the statement of accounts is a prerequisite to us getting an audit opinion. The audit is still ongoing, so therefore it's possible that we may need to change the accounts again after this afternoon, and consequently there's a recommendation in the covering report that the chair of this committee be given delegated authority to approve any subsequent amendments to the accounts. You've been given the draft accounts as the section 151 officer signed them on the 31st of May. We have made some amendments to the accounts and they are detailed in the appendix to the covering report. In addition, we also require the chair of the committee to sign the letter of representation, which is pretty much as in the appendix of the report from the external auditors. It has been amended slightly to explain that the reason we're not adjusting the accounts for GMP is because we view it as judgmental. Basically, we have an estimate, the auditors have a different estimate, and the difference isn't material. And happy to take any questions on the accounts.
Okay. Thank you very much for that. Again, for a lot of it, it's deja vu as well. But however, I know it's got to be presented every year. Any questions or comments, members? Hugh, please.
Chairman, I did put in 10 questions to Mr. Pike. For some reason, which is probably due to the failure of IT, because it is not on his computer, but it is on my computer that was sent, and his has not got it. There were mainly items for clarification on the accounts. It'd be a bit of a problem to go through them all. Yeah, I'm going to go through page 199, the big page 199. I want to know about the housing revenue account here, which made a deficit deterioration caused by a weakness in the housing market, which I assume merely means it's an accounting, it's a book thing, rather than houses are falling down. But there was, that only accounted for a part of the deterioration. So 40 million of the 55 million deterioration, which was there. Where did the rest of the deterioration come from?
There were a number of factors. One of them was the decision to decant Leamington and Horatia houses. There was a reduction in rent income for a number of reasons, which include the government's guidance to reduce rents by 1%, rent right to buy sales, and also there were adjustments to provisions.
On the same page, we have a note on the changes in the way in which the business rate retention is allocated. What, if any, are the financial implications of that for the council?
Thank you, Chair. I can answer that one. That's to do with the amount of growth in business rates that we are able to retain under 100% pooling as compared to 75% pooling. The effect of going from 100% retention to 75% retention has been factored into the budget when we set the budget back in February. The effect being, members may recall that in 2018-19, when we set the budget, we did a one-off RCCO of 2.8 million to capital. That was the benefit of 100% pooling. If you compare that to 1920, we're only putting a 1.6 million one-off transfer into our CCO to reflect the benefit of 75%. So the difference between those two numbers is the effect of going from 100% pool to a 75% pooling arrangement.
And so basically we're slightly worse off.
That's right, because we have to pay some of the growth that we were allowed to retain in the previous year back to central government in the current year.
Page 87/249, I just would love to know what an auto-callable structured note which contained a derivative based on developed market equity indices is.
I'm going to leave that one to Michael.
What that is precisely is it's a tradable instrument, which means you can buy and sell it, and it earns interest at a predetermined interest rate until the stock market indices reach a certain level or don't fall below a certain level, and at that point it repays the principal plus the interest earned to that date.
So it is actually quite a secure form of investment.
We believe it is, yes.
Thank you. Page 90/252, we have on that page financial instruments classed as fair value through profit and loss. And the change is very significant from last year, from 4.938 million to 25.221 million. Could you advise us on what that is, because I'm not quite sure where I could find it.
Yes, essentially what it is that we bought more instruments of that type. Having said that, I would also say that it's still actually quite a small part of our total investment portfolio.
Do we expect it to go up again this year?
It's possible. It really depends on opportunities that may arise.
Then page 100/262, we have 13,067,000 assets transferred from Hampshire County Council last year. Our liability has gone up on the assets which are transferred from Hampshire County Council. Could you advise how that has occurred, and is it something we should be concerned about?
Okay. I'm afraid that the truth is that we made a mistake when we were preparing the disclosure note, and the correct figure for 18-19 is actually 13,067,000, so we've overstated the assets transferred to Hampshire County Council and understated other. We are aware of that error because the auditors picked it up, and we have amended it in the set of accounts which we're going to ask you to approve this afternoon.
Right. Okay. One area where we're putting money into business is the Hampshire Community Bank Holding Limited. Payment of the remaining 2 instalments is conditional on few further due diligence reports. Are these reports compiled by the Hampshire Community Bank Foundation itself, or do we produce these, and if so, who produces them?
I believe that we employ consultants to do that.
Could you confirm that for the minutes so that we can have that confirmed?
Yes, I can confirm that there are independent consultants that carry out the due diligence on our behalf, and on satisfactory conclusion of that due diligence, the instalment would then become due under the agreement that we've got with Hampshire Community Bank.
Thank you. Page 131/293. The highways maintenance, we have this huge liability of 45 million, but the payments are only 1.8 million. Are we safe?
Yes, I believe we are safe. In terms of the highways PFI, we pay a single unitary charge each year, and that charge is apportioned between repayments of a liability, interest, service charges, and life cycle replacement costs. The life cycle replacement costs are actually quite volatile, and in the model that has an effect on the amount that's allocated to repaying the liability each year. But having said that, there is a model, and it will ensure that the liability is paid off by the end of the contract.
That is good to know, because it certainly looks worrying at first sight. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Could you make sure you get your computer working the next time?
It's absolutely inexplicable, because that email address looks exactly correct. What I was going to offer to do is, what we could do is, as we've got these in writing for you now, we could offer to circulate them by email to you if you wanted to.
I'd be grateful if you would, and also to other members of the committee.
Yes, we could do that, Chair.
I just want to bring up some points, and it's in relation to some of the points made by Jerry Brown's deputation. It's page 277, and I know there's a note within what the chief exec's paid and the senior positions that were mentioned in it. It doesn't say how the money's allocated by the different authorities, and that would be useful to know. So that would be ones that have the note 1 and 2. Would be useful to know what the actual breakdown is. What percentage is given by Gosport, what percentage is given by Hampshire and whatever.
If the note complies with the Code of Practice on Accounting, but certainly I take your point, and I don't think there's any reason why we can't do it subject to our contract with those authorities.
I accept it. I mean, but the split for the Director of Adult Social Care, for instance, is there, and the split for the Director of Public Health is there. So we have information in relation to them. The thing I did bring up with before, again, it's the Solent LEP Chief Executive. Again, that looks on paper as though we're paying the total amount of £143,714, but there'll be contributions from other authorities, won't there? And can that be shown at some stage?
The lead chief executive is part for the local enterprise partnership. They receive a number of grants through from central government, and I can confirm that salary is met through those ring-fence government grants. The only reason this is shown in our accounts is because the local authority is the accountable body for those government grants. There is no cost to the local authority taxpayer to meet those salary costs, because, as I say, it's all met by grant from central government paid directly to the LEP.
It'd be useful in future if there was a note to that effect, Julian, yeah?
Yes, we can add that to next year's statement of accounts, if that's what the Chair...
I think it's useful. It just seems to me that we're paying for an organisation I don't know that much about, I have to say, but nevertheless. My other one, and I'm just stating it, is page 281, and it's on the members. So we know what the total cost paid to organisations is, but what contracts were awarded to where members were concerned, and I know in relative terms it's small beer, but during 2018-19, 133,000 was paid to companies in which members had an interest, 102 to Portsmouth College. I don't know who that member is. 10,000 to the Beneficial Foundation. I know who that member is. And services to a cleaning organisation, let's put it that way. And I know who that person is, right? But I don't know. I don't know who the 12,000 is. I was just concerned, Greg. I don't know if you can help. I was concerned about the process in relation to this, where members are involved, because we've got to be squeaky clean, no matter what the amounts are.
It's on their declarations of interest. I can tell you exactly what unlock is if you want to know.
Fine, but I wonder what that's fine. But I wonder what process it goes to make sure that there aren't backhanders being given or awards aren't being given simply because it's a member of the city council. I just want to be reassured on that point. But you're right, Sam. It should be on the interest.
Identify, because a member of public would have to go through every single person's to identify it.
Simon, yeah.
I was just going to make a point, if I could, on that one, Chair, in the fact that you're able to identify the members section as to the businesses based on the declarations of interest that the members actually put in. So if they don't put this in, then you don't know and you can't actually put it in anyway. So there is an onus on responsibility of the members to actually declare that on that basis. Which sort of makes me worry a little bit in that respect. But it does need to be clearer, I think, in who it is. It's a little bit like the Solent LEP one that the chairman highlighted, in the fact that on that page it suggests that the City Council are paying out £143,000 to this chairman, or chairwoman, chairperson, whatever. But I would guess that somewhere else buried deep in the accounts, that money is coming back in grant funding. So to the average person on the Clapham omnibus, so to speak, it doesn't look right. And I think we need to think in terms of, I know it's about accounting practices, but I think we need to identify those sorts of areas like that, even if it's got an asterisk footnote to say refer here and refer there, because the majority of people, including people myself, we're not accounting wizzos when it comes to this sort of stuff, and it's a case of trying to find where it relates to one and where it relates to the other. And I guess it sort of comes back to the deputation that we heard at the start in how can we identify what is and what isn't.
I would agree with that. It would be really helpful to have some footnotes that link the sort of income and the expenditure under various headings exactly like that, to do the cross-referencing. My question, I think, has been partly answered to Councillor Mason's first question, but it wasn't the same question, so I'm going to ask it. I'm concerned at the HARA revenue account on page 146 reports a deficit of 26.4 million, whilst the comprehensive income and expenditure account on page 44, so it's 2 pages, 146 and 44, which includes both the HRA and general fund reporting, a combined surplus of 43.3 million. And my question kind of arose from my interest in following through the costs to us of Leamington and Horatia, which I kind of thought would be much higher than, in fact, they are in terms of impact as a percentage of our accounts.
Okay. In broad terms, the HRA's made a deficit because there's been a downward revaluation of council dwellings, of which Leamington and Horatia were downward revalued by 7.9 million to reflect the fact that they're not going to be used as operational properties anymore. There's also 2.1 million through loss of rent and home loss payments relating to VAT decanting. As I mentioned earlier, there's been a reduction in council rents for various reasons. In terms of the general fund, there's been capital adjustments, including depreciation and impairments of 9.7 million, which was income contributing to the surplus. Against that, there's been a difference on pensions between what the council actually pays to the pension fund as employers' contributions and the actuarial cost determined by the pension fund's actuaries. There's been gains on the revaluation of assets, which some have been on depreciated replacement cost basis, which is different from market values. There's also been a gain through actual experience being better than the actuaries' previous assumptions. What I would also say is that a lot of the gains on the general fund surplus aren't actually cashable. A lot of them are movements in reserves. And I know it's sort of desperately complicated, but I hope that helped answer the question.
Thank you very much. Yes, I very much appreciated the training that was given, and would like to thank you for that also. I certainly felt as a newcomer I got a much better grip on the whole thing after that session. Thank you.
Okay, members, any other points or questions? We then agree, sorry. Michael, did you come in there? Sorry. My hearing, my house is gone. Can I then agree that the statement of accounts be approved and authority be delegated to the chair of the Governance and Audit and Standards Committee to sign an amended 1819 statement of accounts after 26 July? That's today. And should this be required following comments by the auditors? Is that okay? Agreed? Thank you very much, members. Can I just say, and I should have said to members earlier on, that Hugh and I have to go somewhere else by 7 o'clock, which means me leaving here, or Hugh leaving here, because I'm giving him a lift at about 6:15, which is why I asked Simon to sit up here just in case we were on. Can we move to item 8, please?
Well, this is the Treasury Management Outturn Report. It will be going to the Cabinet and Council for approval, and it's brought to this committee for scrutiny. The Treasury management activities in the year have been undertaken within the prudential and Treasury management indicators. We did borrow £34.5 million in March, 23 million for 5 years and 11.5 million for 46 years. In addition, we borrowed £2.1 million interest-free from Zalex, which is a government body to fund energy efficiency improvements. On the investment side, we made an average return of 1.12% before providing for possible losses on Victory Energy. After that provision, the average return falls to 0.47%. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Michael. Any questions, members?
No, it's got to go to full council anyway, Leah.
It's got to go to full council, that's true. Okay, recommendations that, well, there's actual prudential and treasury management indicated especially on audited accounts is shown in B be noted. Is that agreed, members? Thank you. 9, Treasury Management Monitoring Report for the first quarter of 2019-20.
Okay. Yes, it is me again, I'm afraid. This is actually brought to this committee for approval. I can say that there's been no breaches of the Treasury Management Policy, and we have operated within the Treasury Management indicators. Activities in the quarter have been heavily influenced by the forthcoming acquisition of Lakeside Business Park. We did borrow £20 million from the Public Works Loans Board at 2.28%, repayable over 35 years on an annuity basis. We also borrowed £30 million for periods between 1 and 2 months on the money markets at an average rate of 0.67% to fund the acquisition. The acquisition has also caused our investments to increase by £60 million to 477 million at the end of June, and the average return on those investments was 1.2%. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Michael. Any questions, points, members?
No, that's just a note of the report anyway.
Okay, happy members? Thank you very much. Item 10, RIPA. Sorry, I better say it for you. Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act 2000, known as RIPA. Thank you, Liz.
Chair, I will assume people have read. I've highlighted within the attached policy all of the areas, and they're noted here, obviously, in the covering report. The reason it's being amended is because there has been some updated guidance submitted, and there's been a change in key personnel. So I wasn't going to say anything beyond that, but I'm happy to receive and answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Liz. Hugh, please.
A comment and then the question. Just to prove I've read it, page 31/387. You really must get your Latin right. Id est means that is. So the age, we don't have to deal with anybody under 20 or over 24. You mean exempli gratia, e.g., I think, in both A and E. Anyway.
You leave the room now, Liz.
I'm a pedant, you know that. A question on page 10,366, 413. Applications for directed surveillance will be authorised by a Deputy Chief Internal Auditor or Corporate Strategy Manager. Given the public concern about such things, is this sufficiently senior? Should not all of these be authorised by the Chief Executive Officer?
The guidance does give a narrative around the seniority. The Chief Exec is the only individual that can authorise covert surveillance with the use of a CHIS and a vulnerable individual. We haven't had applications since there was a change in the requirements, and custodial sentences of 6 months and above came into play. The authorisation level of the officers that are involved would be considered to be third tier and would be considered to be appropriate in line with the legislation, if that helps at all. But we don't have much. I wonder whether, to a degree, because you do have to know the legislation that sits underneath it, whether it is appropriate for it to be the Chief Exec, because I'm sure there's probably a number of other areas that they'd need to be familiar with anyway.
The question, if such surveillance takes place, should a report come to governance, audit and standards? Because this is a standards matter and a governance matter. Obviously, it would have to be very seriously redacted so that we could not tell about the individuals concerned. But should we not be aware that this is going on?
The real requirement is probably that we need to tell you on an annual basis whether there's been any applications. I think it would be so redacted, it would give you no information at all. If there is ever any cases to which internal audit have been involved in, and we will do our darndest not to do surveillance because it's too resource intense. We are duty bound to report that to you anyway, as and when it's gone all through the relevant timeframes and the reporting processes and any appeals so forth. So I think it is very appropriate that you know if we have enacted this power. I don't believe it's appropriate for you to necessarily know if there is the individual circumstances of the cases. If it's audit, we will tell you, but if it happens to be because of blue badge, for example, I don't think it would necessarily be appropriate to come through.
And a final, page 29/385, just a final comment. 2C, to obtain detailed information about a subject's activities. Do you need anything else than 2 there? It covers everything, does it not?
It does, but that's because we like to hit the gold standard and make certain that any cases or any operation that we don't cause any issues later on down the line because for some reason the information and evidence wasn't acquired via due process.
Thank you, Chair. Looking at the bits that have been changed, those are the highlighted parts. Do they compare with what other authorities will be doing? Are they standard words or are they ones that you've very ably put together yourself?
They would have been, an awful lot of it, to be honest, have lifted from the supporting legislation because it's very relevant and appropriate. Other authorities I know within the area will make relevant changes to kind of factor those on. So it does mirror consistency, but it is legislation based.
I'm glad to hear that because I think it's very much in the public interest that these things do stick closely to the legislation and are similar or the same in every authority. And just to follow up to that, I was absolutely fascinated by this. It's an aspect of our work it had never crossed my mind about. So thank you for that. But I also wonder how easy it is for the public to know that this might happen and this would be our role, and whether it can be done in a kind of simple way. Obviously now this document is in the public domain, but it might not be the first place I went if I became concerned about this whole thing.
The legislation's been in place for quite a considerable period of time, so there's always narrative out there, but for a considerable number of years we have just not enacted that power. So it is a little hidden, but I think on an annual basis moving forward, if we do a return to you to say, has it been used, and the number of times it's been used, we have to do a return to and they've changed the name, I want to say the Office of the Surveillance Commissioner, but that's not the case because they're the IPCO that's now in there. We have to do an annual return to them anyway, and it's that annual return which will probably have an impact as to whether we're inspected. Again, if we are inspected, we'd be duty bound to bring that back to you anyway to tell you the results of that. And it's interesting because in theory the port could be subject to an inspection the same way that we can be subject to an inspection, because obviously those powers and CCTV kind of forms part and parcel of the requirements.
Thank you. I wasn't just referring to how often we did this, and I'm glad there's an annual return and I'm glad we can look at it, but just the public themselves as a matter of information and accountability, whether there's a kind of 2 paragraphs on the website or something that would reassure them that on some cases that something's happening and also alert them.
I wonder whether we could actually consider adding it to our transparency elements around the number of fraud cases. We can certainly do that, and we want to build upon that information in any rate, so we can say the number of RIPA cases, so it's quite explicit, and it would probably be a little bit more intuitive to find those particular areas than it would. You'd have to know the legislation to really go find it.
And thank you for that. What I was thinking about was just to explain to the public that this duty does exist and that this is, we do that anyway, do we? No.
No, we don't do that as a matter of course. Some of the information, I think, you're right, they would have to go find it, they'd have to know the legislation. What we can do is we can add it to the transparency information that we give in relation to fraud, which is a requirement. So there isn't a requirement for us to kind of publish, but I think it would sit quite nicely and fit within that, and that would be out in the public domain.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, members, can we then agree the recommendations here, which to note there have been no RIBA applications since the 29th of January 2016, and approve the required changes detailed under Section 6. Is that agreed? It'll be time to deal with one more, which is item 11, this application for political balance rules in relation to members' complaint subcommittees. Those who have been around a while will know this is the usual chestnut that's got to come here every year in order to ensure that we can get complaints against members dealt with as speedily as possible. So where we prefer a member from each group to sit on the complaints panel, indeed the initial filtering panel, sometimes that's not possible. So we're saying that, I know officers do their best. In fact, I sat on a filtering panel a couple of weeks ago, and it was cross-party as it happens. But in case that can't happen, in order not to prolong things, we just suggest that we just apply the political balance. Enough said from me. Is that okay, members? We've agreed every year. Yeah, we do.
Sorry, this gets us around the proportional representation part of the committee structure that we go through in annual council. But we have to do this, I think it's legally every year, just so that we're compliant.
Just for clarification, Chair, I understood that we had to do it every time the committee changed or the makeup of the committee changed. No? That was my understanding.
Thank you very much. Right, I'm going to hand over to Simon, that's okay, from item 12 onwards. Apologies that I have to go, but parties make decisions tonight as to whose candidates for the local elections will be next year. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I guess that includes Councillor Mason as well? It does. Right, okay. Sorry? We're 2, 4, 6, we're quorum at 2, aren't we? So we are quorum with 4 of us here. Yeah, it's 1/3, and on a 6-person committee it's effectively 2 people, which seems a bit strange to say the least, but hey ho. Agenda item 12, performance management update Q4. Who am I looking at? Kelly's smiling at me down there.
Yep, this one's mine.
Fire away, Kelly.
So again, veterans of the committee will recognise this is a report that comes to you on a very regular basis, but hopefully will notice that the format has significantly changed for Q4 of 2018-19 in response to, I think, a number of conversations that the committee have had over the past year or so about the fact that the report had changed in format from being quite slim, had grown to increase and take into account more information, and had probably gone beyond what was helpful in terms of including too much information to really usefully analyse. What we've tried to do now is to slim it back down, so we're looking at performance across different dimensions. So the first one, which is included in Appendix 1, is summaries from directors around the things that are concerning them operationally. Appendix 2 of the report that you've got looks at kind of projects across the organisation and rating how we're doing against those, and then Sorry, no, I've got that wrong. Appendix 2 is around performance against the corporate priorities for the organisation presented graphically, and Appendix 3 is around the projects in the organisation and their progress, both against timescales, budgets, and a bit of a summary around the key risks and whether they're likely to achieve their objectives. What we will be bringing to you in future reports is also a summary of corporate strategic risks and a more in-depth deep dive on a quarterly basis, a one risk in turn, and giving you sort of some sense of assurance around that risk and the mitigation that's in place. So I think from this discussion, what I would say is that some of the areas are not yet fully populated, because in relation to the performance indicators, particularly against the corporate priorities, we're sort of changing those now in quarter 4. So for quarter 1 of the new reporting period, 1920, you should have much more detail there, but we've sort of done the groundwork around that in this quarter, so some of them are new and aren't yet fully populated. The information on projects is reasonably fully populated, and we will continue to develop that as new projects come online and others drop off with completion. And I think you'll agree that the director's summaries this time are much more populated than they have been previously, because some of that capacity that was going into the more detailed commentaries against directorate performance indicators has now been diverted to this, and I actually think that you should probably find this more helpful in terms of focusing you on the key issues for those directorates. So I think the conversation is really obviously to comment on the issues within the report that are of interest, but also to happy to take any feedback on this new way of presenting it. Thank you, Councillor Bosher.
One quick question I've got, looking at the directorate summaries, I guess it's more of a comment than a question in a lot of instances. There seems to be a mismatch in the way the directors actually fill these things in, because I'm looking at culture, leisure and regulatory services, and they're fabulous. The only issue they've got, as any such, is that the cemetery strategy has been slightly delayed, whereas everybody else has been talking about Brexit and budgetary constraints and a lot of other things. Everything's going well in culture and leisure. Now, perhaps it's the cynic in me that suggests that isn't necessarily the case, and it might just be a case of chuck a little bit in that report and send it off, and that'll do them.
I think it's less the cynic in you. I think you have identified that did not have the full attention this quarter, and at the time of writing, this was the director dealing with the D-Day commemorations and was very open about the fact this probably didn't have its full attention that quarter. That will be rectified for quarter 1.
You ever considered a career in politics, Kerry? with an answer like that, Judith?
I think this is. I'm really glad to see this. I think. Something I've, as a fairly new councillor, I kind of expected to see, and I'm glad on this committee to see it. I do think that it's disappointing that under the director summaries, the immediate priorities are all identified in terms of doing things rather than actually improving an outcome that they know is falling behind. And I would wonder if it was something that you could influence them next time, is to talk, for example, about reducing the number of street homeless people rather than the actions they might be taking. That's as an example. It's also the same, and I suppose more seriously, under Appendix 2, which I appreciate isn't populated yet, so it might be a good time to get in on it. There's some very strong contrasts between parts of this report. Under priority, a city that works together, enabling communities to thrive, people to live healthy, safe, independent lives, that the measurements are, well, obviously CQC service ratings is interesting. Average length of funded intervention, average length of funded intervention, number of clients. They're all things that make me say, so what? I really want to know what the service users are thinking and whether their lives are lengthened and they're more adding life to years and years to life, as we would have said in the NHS. These are all about, I think shorter hospital stays is an important one as an exception to the rule, but and then they get a lot better. Prevalence of childhood obesity is clearly an outcome-focused one. Drug-related deaths, likewise. Public health are always good at this sort of stuff. And so on. But I think there's some inconsistencies, because some of these things make me say, so what? That's my test. And some of these things, I think, no, that is exactly what we need to be monitoring. And I can give other examples of that. The children's one are fairly good. Numbers of children receiving targeted early help clearly needs to be related to number of children being a cause for concern and number of looked after children. So a bit of reordering might help. So it showed us the preventative process in work, and so on. There are a number of these which I think are the so what things, and a number of where it's actually tackling what we really want. So, for example, we've got road collisions, traffic accidents in the 0 to 21 year group. We've got some things about cycling that are to do with improving cycling road layouts. I actually would like to know generally the number of RTAs involving cyclists, because that's kind of more important than doing something that may or may not work. So just a sort of feeling about we need to get down to look at actual outcomes for people, and in some cases we need to go and ask them, actually. With some of these things you can't tell unless quality of life ones for the elderly, for example. We need to get some measures that are actual people saying themselves, yes, this is better because I can now do so and so.
Traffic and Transportation actually collect near-miss data involving cyclists and traffic accidents as well. So, quick question to them will probably answer that question. But just sort of touching on that one, I notice that in the public health one, and it's sort of like, it's probably a question you probably can't answer, Kelly, but more of an observation. If you look at the public health one, immediate priorities, right in the middle there they've got air quality, and they talk about that with strategic transport planning and a variety of other things. And yet if you go to regeneration, which is effectively planning regeneration and transport these days, which talks about the local plan and delivering against Brexit, local transport plan and stuff like that, its immediate priorities don't seem to be air quality, and I'm just wondering whether they actually talk to each other at all, because I would have thought the regeneration team that includes the local transport plan, air quality would have been front and centre of their immediate priorities.
I think you're absolutely right, and I think some of those inconsistencies are much easier to pick up in this slimmed down report because it jumps out of you in a way that in the 300 pages or whatever we presented previously it absolutely didn't. What we have now introduced is an attempt to get, and what we didn't have in the process previously is an attempt to actually get that full corporate look at the information. So previously we didn't have necessarily a directors forum that we take it to collectively and get people to look at it and say, oh, actually that probably doesn't quite harmonise. So we're certainly introducing that step. In terms of the director commentaries and all that, the things they're going to do rather than the outcomes they need to achieve, I'm very happy to say that's probably a response to the instruction that I gave in filling that out, and absolutely will adjust that instruction for next time. Around the measures that are more the sort of so what things, I think that's a really interesting challenge to us. I think some of the commentaries would help that in terms of the measures, because what a number of the measures are is almost the proxy towards the outcomes, because some of the outcomes measures don't really shift. So the public health measures that you alluded to, for example, well actually they're 2 years behind and only shift on an annual basis, whereas actually the proxy around those will be more of the kind of activity indicator, are we driving towards it? And there will be other information that we're not bringing into this report that will give you more of a sense around what people think and feel. As Councillor Bosch said, there'll be a huge amount of information around traffic and transport, around the RTAs and who they involve and where they are. Similarly, children's social care have an absolute battery of information around, for example, the looked after children, the health of their looked after children, the education of their looked after children, the length of time they stay in care, and what we're trying to do is reduce that to almost a meaningful proxy. But what we will be wrapping around that is the commentary that sort of tells you more, what does that tell us? What's the so what around that? The adult social care suite of indicators there, so the ones you referred to around the length of funded interventions, at the moment they look quite stark, but what they are is a subset of the indicators that they're using to measure the progress against their wider adult social care strategy. And again, the commentary will place those in a context. So I think at the moment, you're absolutely right, the indicators on themselves look very so whatty. I think when we have that more developed commentary around it, you'll start to understand, and this is so what, because it's telling us something around that. But you're right, that report will never do all of that in the 1 quarter.
I mean, I'm conscious that some of the things that we've got listed are things that are statutorily need to be reported, and I'm the last one who'd want to cause additional work for people in doing things that we particularly thought was useful. But it's a question of emphasis, and it's a question of some of those things being very much so what, and they shouldn't be there. I presume next year we'll have something about net carbon reduction, will we, and a target and progress against that.
I would fully expect that to be there, and otherwise, again, there'll be the ongoing developed suite of reporting around that topic.
Thank you, Chair. Just on that point, and I'm making this point on behalf of Councillor Mason, who's far more fastidious than me in reading through the minutes and then cross-referencing them to what the report has done or hasn't done. And he's pointed out that it says in the minutes of the last meeting that the Air Quality Action Plan will appear as a line in its own right to make progress clear, and it doesn't appear clearly on the basis of conversations that have just been had that it's not clear.
Councillor Ferret, and perhaps I could correspond to Councillor Mason directly on that. It's being picked up as a project rather than an indicator, so there should be a reference to it, and my huge apologies if it's not there, I'm going to check myself. It should be there in the appendix that's around projects. Let me have a look.
Air quality local plan program, take us to clean and safer green at page 428.
Yeah, so it's a line there as a project, and if I respond directly to Councillor Mason and make sure that any further information he'd require on that is brought to his attention, I'm very happy to take that away.
Yeah, sure. It's 428. Got to have your glasses on to see
Second
it.
indication has to make us the clean and safer second project. It's not a great information on the plan.
Okay, can I just say, Chair, in terms of the report itself, because it's been much discussed here in terms of format and length, I think we've got the happy medium here. However, your point, Simon, is very pertinent. The reason it became such a topic of debate was directors not giving it the attention that they should and submitting reports that were one line and giving no insight as to what was happening in their in their particular area. So, and I take what Kelly has said in terms of the pressures on that particular person, but we've got to make sure that yes, we've got a sort of stripped down report here from what we've had previously, but people still do what they need to do and give us the information we want.
My comment was just actually, I mean, having not been here before and seen previous iterations, this report seemed extremely useful to me as a new council member, and as starting out as kind of shadow spokesperson for children and families as well. There's a lot I'm learning from this report that I've yet to be able to get to grips with via that department directly. So I was actually more thinking in terms of, is this disseminated to the whole council, including cabinet members and shadow spokespeople, because I think they would potentially find it useful.
Take it back to them.
I wouldn't like to advocate cutting down any more trees to actually produce this, but the link might certainly...
electronically rather than physically, most likely.
The link might certainly go, but I have to say, for some of us that have been around this an extraordinarily long time, and I happen to be one of them in its previous incarnation as Policy and Review Performance Panel, I've got it right, yeah. We used to have key performance indicators and a raft of sheets with data attached to it, and I have to say it was largely meaningless and very, very amusing, and the one that always stood out for me was we consistently missed our key performance indicator for pregnant teenagers, which always inferred that we should be getting more teenagers pregnant rather than actually reducing it. So I have to say, and a lot of it's got to do with Kelly and her team, that the report has evolved a long way to the point where we can actually challenge the directorates on things like the culture and leisure one, where they don't seem to have any challenges whatsoever, and I don't think that's true for a second. We're actually challenging the content of the information that's coming back rather than questioning the way the report is or what the key performance indicators actually mean. Any other questions, guys? No? Okay, right, so we are looking to note the report in its revised format and agree if any further action is required in response to the performance issues highlighted. I think we're really agreeing that we want to see, I wouldn't say the directorate taking it a little bit more seriously in some instances, I think, a little bit of more joined up thinking in the fact that it isn't just another tick box exercise that's going to take them 5 minutes on a Friday afternoon, and something that actually has something meaningful attached to it so that we can look at it. Judith, yeah.
Chair, does that mean that we're going to be minuting my suggestion it should be developed further to be more outcomes specific also, or not?
I think that's fair. I think we can look to do that because we can challenge the outcomes. We can bring reports back here if there are issues contained within it that we want to explore any further. I'm always quite reluctant, and I've said it before, for officers to go away and say, I'll send you an email update, because this is a public meeting, and I think we have an agreed action in the past that if that's something like that is going to happen, then it needs to be attached to the minutes or to as an addendum on the website as a report of what actually happened, so that the rafts of general public that we actually get here, which is largely Mr. Brown, actually know that some outcome has actually happened, rather than private emails pinging around councillors with an update of this and update of that.
No, on the particular one of air quality, I'll certainly let Councillor Mason know where that is, and for the next one we'll make sure their attention is brought to that particular issue. With your permission, Chair, I'd also like to be able to feed back this discussion to directors in my next quarterly email, just sort of, I suppose reinforcing that actually the value that this committee does find is in some of those insights that come through in the commentaries, and to obviously just reinforce that continues to be really helpful. And the more effort that's put into that, the less we have to grow the format of the report to try and capture everything in a template, really. So I think that'd be really helpful. Yeah, thank you.
Down to item 14, dates of future meetings. We've got 3 dates there, 20th September, 29th of November and the 6th of March. Or at 4 p.m. or earlier. Well, I guess I'll...
I'd like to thank people for coming at 4 o'clock on Friday. When I was in work, I wouldn't have been that happy about it. It's almost entirely my fault because I am not around for meetings before 4 o'clock on a Friday, nor on a Thursday. I wouldn't at all mind it changing a day, as long as it was Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. But I just wanted to say personal thank you to the Chair and Vice Chair and all the rest of you for having put it at 4 o'clock. I'm afraid for a little while it will have to be 4 o'clock. I think these 3 meetings for me, if it has to be on a Friday, have to be at 4 o'clock, and I can just make it. I did it today. It would be very kind, but after that, my granddaughter will be older, and I think we'll have a change in the requirements of the grandparents.
Yeah, I fully accept Councillor Smythe's personal arrangements, but this is a dreadful time, I think, to hold this meeting, given the amount of information that we have, given that clearly the officers are required here to stay on a Friday night. Friday night is clearly the end of the week and a difficult time in terms of travel. I just don't think it works on the basis of, clearly we've had 2 of the councillors who have had to go, no doubt, to an engagement this evening. So I would like to see it go back to what it was, either 2 o'clock or 10:30. 2 o'clock seemed to work well for a number of years, but but I think this is completely impractical, and like I say, I fully understand the difficulties that Councillor Smythe has, but then as individuals we've all got difficulties and jobs and lives and things to organise, and I don't think we can run the timing of a council meeting on the basis of one person's personal arrangement.
I would entirely agree with you, Councillor Ferreton. I wondered if it could be a Monday, Tuesday or a Wednesday.
What we've got in front of us is the date for future meetings. Can I suggest to Democratic Services then that perhaps we leave Friday the 20th of September in there as that statement and maybe strike out the second two for the time being, and just caveat that with a discussion will take place between members to see whether it can be changed. I'm only thinking in terms of the fact that if we leave the 20th of September in there, then at least we've got a target date that members are anticipating at this moment in time, and separately we have a discussion to see whether, with the chairman and Councillor Mason, because obviously two members of the committee aren't here who clearly are going to want to have an input into this, and perhaps it's a subject for a conversation off-grid, shall we say, in that respect, because we all have, I mean, I have a full-time job, so in theory, if we're going to meet at 10:30 in the morning, I'm taking a day's holiday every time we have a governance and audit meeting. So each one of us is going to have individual circumstances that we need to find a consensus on, and I think we take that conversation off-grid, but perhaps just leave the 20th of September there as to be confirmed, shall we, and take the other two out, then at least we know we're meeting in September, if members are okay with that at this moment in time.
I think Fridays are particularly bad for all sorts of reasons, actually.
Well, as I said, it can change. We have it within our gift as a committee to actually change it in that respect. So that's what I'm suggesting. We just leave Friday the 20th of September in there to be confirmed, and take the other two out, and say members will have a conversation to actually confirm this at a later date, because it'll go into the forward plan, and if that decision has happened. Yes, Lizzie.
Councillor, I was also going to ask, when we are coming up with the days, can we also have a conversation with external and internal audit, because we cover multiple other organisations, and if you moved it, for example, to a Monday, it will probably clash and you won't get us attending, and we need to attend. So can we also have a conversation? Sorry.
Sunday lunchtime it is then. Joe, do you have a general idea of where we're headed with this?
Yeah, we'll check diaries. We'll look at the civic diary as well, as some of the portfolio meetings are sort of 4 o'clock on other days of the week. So we'll just have to check with other clients.
But I think there needs to be a conversation. I call it off-grid, because I don't think anybody on the millions watching us on live stream want to hear about our shopping habits and everything else like that. But I think we'll have the conversation off-grid about it. But I think we need to have the meeting in September on that basis, and we can have no doubt a bit of email tennis to try and get a consensus that's going to suit everybody, including the chairman, who obviously has the final say, and his colleague, because it wouldn't be appropriate that we have the decision here when two members aren't here, I don't think.
Once again, I apologise, and I'm grateful, and it won't go on for very long.
Okay, item 15, exclusion of press and public in relation to item 16. Before I move into exclusion of press and public, do any members have any specific questions that relate to the procurement management information that requires me to do that, or is this something that we can take without going into public session? And I'm of course looking at Greg here, because I think he's the best person to answer that.
question is there anything which we would want to have confidentially, yeah?
That's sort of an indirect question because, I mean, it's an overview of the of procurement. Is this something that you can present without going into exclusion of press and public? Is the sort of the first question?
There's I think, if I remember correctly, and I stand to be corrected, I think it's really... I think it relates to Appendix 5, 4 and 5, so I could do through to Appendix 3 if you'd like, and then we'd have to break.
So we could go through Appendix 3, which is the intro of the report?
Yeah, okay, well if you'd like to do that, then I'll explain when we get to the Appendix 4 onwards and we need to go to examples.
So are members happy if we go through that part in public session, and if anybody feels the need to move into exempt session, then we'll exclude press and public at that point if we feel the need to. I'm trying to keep this as open as I possibly can under the circumstances. Okay, Greg, if you'd like to fire away.
Okay, I apologise in advance, I've got a bit of a croaky voice this particular occasion. Okay, this period was a very good period. Compliance was above target in all areas and overall, apart from children's, families and education, which was due mainly to special educational needs placements, and the risk of any challenge on those is extremely low. I can go into that in a bit more detail. Other than that, this period had the third lowest value of spend by waivers for the last 4 reports, but actually the highest number by quantity, and that was just because of a lot of small value waivers for D-Day, because we had some very last minute changes due to certain people coming, and that was it. So that's the headlines for this. I'll go through it now in a little bit more detail, but I'll go at a fairly quick pace. If people want more detail, then please shout. Okay, so the first thing to do is to look at Appendix 1. Yeah, 82% of the non-conforming spend with children's, families and education is actually to do with special educational needs. Special educational needs go essentially also allow for parental wishes as well. So it's always going to be hard to make those fully compliant. What we are doing is we're working with Children's Social Care to establish a framework so that hopefully we can make more of these going forward compliant. And that is about 492k's worth of that. 73k is actually to do with top-up. So what happens is there's a certain budget that's allowed for, but if a person's package is higher than that, then the local authority in which the pupil or student is resident has to top that up. And again, that's to do with special educational needs. The next is 53k to do with providing semi-independent framework for children post-16 to learn how to essentially become independent in their own place. And then the last thing was Durham County Council, which is again where this part of children's social care, you get to go for a central hub to then find a secure unit which suits the needs of that child to go to. That's then linked to a contract. So as I say, it's a very compliant quarter, and any issues related to children's, which I'm sure people would understand the nature of that, and the vast majority of those we're trying to establish a framework to make compliant moving forward. Okay, so that's deals with compliance in Appendix 1, and that also deals with Section 2. Section 2, there were some areas where details of waivers awarded in Quarter 2. In children's and families, you'll note a relatively high level, at 1.7 million. $1 million of that was for children, children and mental health, which is CAMS, which is for $1 million to Solent NHS, and 600k of that was for it's called Street, but essentially it's for unaccompanied minors. We have a large demand for that because of the ferry port. Housing neighbourhood services, not a large amount by percentage but by value. The vast majority of that 343k was due to changes to a home for exceptional needs, and that was done because the overhead and profit that the provider agreed to do that was, I can't mention the percentage, but was a very low percentage and was deemed to be improved value for money. Equally, by doing this, we managed to make sure that the family wasn't broken up and the family stayed together in the same house. The other thing was to do with security at Leamington and Horatia, and I'm sure people understand the background to that as well. Moving on to section 3, spend with waiver. And I think this is the last part, the last appendix, which is I can do out of exempt. Essentially, there are a few areas which might come to people's attention. Adult social care is to do with Hampshire County Council's provision of Harry Sotnick House. So this is where the council took that provision back in-house, and there's a special, for want of a better phrase, licensing you need in terms of the provision of care that you have to get through, and Hampshire have got that appropriate license and they provide that care in there for us. But that arrangement is coming to an end, I think, in about the next 6 months, when Portsmouth will have its own qualification and be able to take over running those services. Corporate services, a large amount of that was to do with a Microsoft license, which we get through a company, and that was taken out because of favourable terms. Public health was mainly due to health visitors and school nurses, but also for people's understanding who may be new to governance and audit, public health transferred to the local authority, I think in about 2016-17. There were a lot of legacy arrangements, shall we say, that public health had with Solent, etc., and they're working their way through recommissioning those models. And then the capital schemes related to the purchase of some, there's been a change in the hardware requirements driven by changes in Microsoft. So there's been a W10, Windows 10 requirement to drive and purchase new hardware. And again, there was a capital scheme relating to that. We were assured by Hewlett-Packard that we could have got no favourable, better terms than we did. So that was the reason for that. And again, there's one which is to do with CCTV cameras, and the group who looked at that actually evaluated 5 different suppliers' cameras, and only one supplier could actually provide cameras that were able to be hybrid and digital, because we'll be moving to a local full fibre gigabit network, and these cameras will have the ability to work on the current analogue, but then go to the vastly improved digital. That, in essence, is all I can do in public. The rest I'll have to do in private, exempt.
Any members have any questions that relate to what we just had? Matthew?
No, I haven't the question. My question was relating to moving on to the orange papers, but perhaps you want to.
Okay. Do any members have any questions that relate to the orange papers at all? I think Matthew has.
So in terms of whether or not.
Yeah, I do.
Okay. So if we're going
okay. Well, we do have some questions that relate to the orange papers. So we've done as much as we can in public session. Therefore, I propose that we move into exempt session then, so that we can consider those questions. All those in agreement? Agreed. Okay, thanks. Right, we now move into exempt session. So, apologies, Jerry and others. We're going to have to politely throw you out.
This is Ty. Ty has been heavily involved in the state.